Hello, and welcome to the Trustwave webinar, Risk Radar, a 360-degree view of threats in retail. I'm Doug Olenek, Digital Content Marketing Manager at Trustwave and your moderator. Joining us today is Ziv Mador, Trustwave's Vice President of Security Research. Today, Ziv will break down the 2024 Trustwave Risk Radar Report, Retail Sector. He'll explain in detail what the Spider Labs team uncovered and offer some additional color on its findings. But before we get started, let's just cover a couple of housekeeping notes. If you are viewing this session live, our webinar platform allows you to customize your viewer screen. Feel free to adjust the size and positioning of the slide windows. We do recommend that you use Chrome as the browser of choice. And if you have any problems with the audio or the session delivery, I always recommend that you hit the refresh button, and hopefully the system will overcome any connectivity issues. And after Ziv completes his presentation, we will have a question and answer period. If you have any questions, please don't be shy and place them in the area provided on your screen at any time during the webinar. We will answer by email any questions that we cannot get to today during the show. And finally, today's presentation will be recorded, and we will be sending a follow-up email to all attendees with the link to that recording. So with all of that said, Ziv, the floor is yours. Let's hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Doug. So thank you for joining today for a threat briefing on our new research centered on the retail sector. We're going to share threat intelligence we discovered and analyzed based off the research we do, the Trustwave Spider Labs team does. It's the team of security experts within the company. We investigate a very wide range of cyber threats throughout the year, and would like to share our findings with you. So as I said, and as Doug mentioned, we're gonna focus on the retail industry specifically in this webinar. And here are a couple of statistics that demonstrate the threats that target this industry. First of all, almost 60% of the attacks that targeted this industry started with phishing. And that's true both for the consumers that use retailers' services, as well as the employees working at retailers, both of which are being targeted, of course, for very different reasons, and we're going to talk about that too. Going to the piece of statistics on the right, 92% of the way or the times that attackers managed to get the credentials of users was through simply brute force attacks. Brute force attacks are simply, they mean that someone was trying many different combinations of the password, username, password, until one of them just worked out. Normally, that method would work well when the password is simple, not too many characters, sometimes a piece of information that is typical to that user, like cell phone number or a name from their family, or city name, or things of that sort, all of which are very simple to guess with password breakers. When they use stolen user sessions, which by the way can be bought on underground forums, almost half of them belong to Amazon domains, which means that people logged in to their Amazon account, and while they were doing that, someone captured those user sessions and is selling them. By replaying them, it allows someone to connect to their account in Amazon without authorization. When you look at ransomware attacks, there are many groups that target retailers. I'm going to talk more about that in later slides. The most active groups were Lockbit, 3.0, and Play. Play is the name of a fairly active ransomware group. Each of those groups was responsible for 15% of the ransomware attacks against retailers based on our statistics. 62% of the reported ransomware attacks against retailers were in the US. No doubt there are multiple very large retailers in the US, but also the regulations in the states that required reporting ransomware attacks. So perhaps this number is skewed a little bit by the tighter regulation in the states. And there are many sub-industries as part of the retail industry. 16% of those attacks targeted the food and beverage retailers, But as I'm going to show you soon, almost any type of retail business was targeted by ransomware. It's a problem that impacts not only the different types of retailers, but many different industries. So here are some of the headlines from the last 12 months. I'm not going to read them one by one, but what we can see is some very well-known retailers and less known retailers were targeted here in the States, in other countries around the world, in Europe, Australia, in other regions. Really, ransomware groups and cyber criminals really have no preference who they attack, as long as they can come across a lot of data that they can use for extortion or to sell. So they'll always try to monetize their actions. And retailers, being businesses that hold a lot of data, let's say credit card information is a good example, are great targets. Okay, that ends up with breaches like we see here. So every industry has some unique characteristics. Let's talk about some of the things that are unique to this industry, retail, which translate to higher cybersecurity risks. First, seasonal fluctuations. As we know, the demand for retail changes over the year. For example, we're approaching the holiday season, the shopping season, where sales increase tremendously, also online. That requires the retailers sometimes to add more workforce quickly, add more systems quickly. So you can understand that along with that, if the process is not managed carefully, it can introduce more threats to the organization. Third-party dependencies. Retailers rely on a lot of third-party technology, third-party solutions. It can be B2B web solutions that a website or other systems like payment systems use. It can be other vendors that help them serve their physical locations, their point of sale systems, many other vendors that have access to their networks. In all those scenarios, there's a risk that if the vendor is breached, that breach will impact also the retailer. And there were cases that happened that followed that, unfortunately, followed that path in the past. Physical security risks. Many retailers have physical locations. In those physical locations, there are point of sale systems, warehouses, computerized systems, computers that the employees use to log in. Clearly, if someone can physically access any of those systems, install a schemer or some malware on the point of sale system, or access the computers of that retailer, there is a risk. Okay, so it's not just some online business that the only way to compromise it is through the web or through the internet. Here there are physical risks as well. The franchise model, clearly a challenge. A retailer that relies on franchisees to manage all the different locations will have the challenge of enforcing cybersecurity measures and guidelines consistently across all those locations, correct? The retailer can have very clear cybersecurity policy and guidelines how to manage the different systems and networks and servers. But at the end, if there are different people in the different locations that are responsible for enforcing that and are not direct employees of the retailer, again, there is a risk that those guidelines and measures will not be deployed consistently. And last, diverse payment system. Nowadays, retailers can sell their merchandise in many different ways, right? In the physical stores, where they use point of sale system to charge the buyers. It can be online stores, it can be gift cards, it can be cryptocurrency in certain cases. And every method can be breached or attacked or targeted in different ways. And obviously, the retailer has to secure all those different methods in order to avoid a breach. So you see the challenge here. So with that, we just released last week 3 reports One is an overarching report, which I'm going to focus on during this webinar about the retail sector, but also 2 deep dive reports. I'll talk more about them soon. In those reports, we highlight 4 trends. First is the continued rise of e-commerce, how fraud targets retailers, the recent changes in PCI compliance, and ransomware groups. So let's talk more about each of them. So as I said, we released 2 deep dive reports along with the main report about the retail industry. The first one focuses on e-commerce and the cyber threats that are more specific to them. When people shop online, both the consumer and the business can be targeted, and in many different ways, but really cybercriminals target both sides. And the consumers use computers or cell phones. Their devices might be breached by malware that would attempt to steal their password, capture their credit card information, etc., bank account details, anything, all those details they might type in when they shop online. Malware and cybercriminals might also target the business systems. That these are the web servers, the data servers, the other applications that run on the servers of that business that might get compromised. The typical attack would involve a web shell that would be installed on any of those servers. And when consumers make those transactions or log in, the information that is visible to the server will be captured and exfiltrated, all right, and then sold or used later for for extortion. So e-commerce becoming more popular. In 2 years, the expectation is that about 1/4 of all sales will be done online. Is becoming a bigger and bigger target. If a system gets breached successfully or a large number of consumers get successfully breached, then the cybercriminals end up with a lot of data that, again, they can soon use to sell or monetize or for extortion. Information, and I already provided the examples. All right, so let's continue. The other major threat that impacts this industry is fraud. Fraud is a bit different than malware. The initial method of getting the user or the business to run some code or providing some information is through fraudulent communication, such as email, text messages, and others. In the UK, for example, 35% of the retailers experienced fraud or other cyber attacks, which was a 37% increase from the year before. And the total losses were more than 11 billion pounds, which is nearly 15 billion US dollars. There are multiple malware families that would use fraud. We focus on 2 examples in this report: Ducktail, which hijacks Facebook accounts, and Darkgate, but there are many others, and there are many other schemes where fraud is used for that purpose, fraudulent gift cards and others. So we invite you to get that report and get all those examples there. The PCI DSS standard comes to ensure compliance and minimize the risk of businesses of having cybersecurity issues and vulnerabilities. PCI DSS specifically focuses on payment systems, and in March next year, the next version 4.0 will take effect. There are some major changes in this version. It enforces stricter guidelines around password management, multi-factor authentication, etc. It also introduced a new concept called the targeted risk analysis, TRA, which allows a more custom evaluation of that business, which takes into account the unique environment of that business. It's in a way more flexible and but it might be harder to pass. So we invite you to read more about it. We also have a group of consultants that can help you prepare for those evaluations. Talking again about ransomware, there are many different groups, dozens of different groups on underground forums that carry out ransomware attacks out there. We highlight here some of the most active ones: Play, Lockbit, and other. Some of the names might sound familiar to you, some of them less. Every year there are new groups that conduct ransomware attacks. The top most active ones, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, are Play and Lockbit. But there are many other ones, and the map of active groups changes every year. What you can see at the bottom is that many different retailers are targeted: food and beverage, apparel, home improvement, etc. The list goes on. The statistics also obviously impacted by the size of that sub-industry. Perhaps, say, sport retailers are not as big or not as common as food. But nevertheless, every business, they would target any business as long as that business has, one, a lot of data that they can steal and use for extortion, and secondly, that it's not secure well enough and they can infiltrate into their computer networks. Now let's talk a little bit about the tactics and techniques that those attackers use as reflected by our telemetry. So first of all, and I mentioned that piece of statistic at the beginning, 56% of the initial access to computer systems was through phishing. Phishing still remains a very effective method of getting credentials to certain systems. They can try many times. If it fails 99 times and succeeds the 100 times, that's good enough. They got the credentials they need. They would quickly log in and start the lateral movement. Or if it's a consumer, try to get access to their bank account, conduct fraudulent transactions, etc. In other cases, in 40% of the other cases, they would compromise valid accounts. There are multiple ways how they would do that, but by compromising accounts, that would give them the ability to run malicious code on that computer without authorization, and from there they'll start moving laterally. In 65%, it's going to be the user actually execute the malware. A typical example is an email that has a malicious attachment, some social engineering story in the email. People execute that attachment. Usually it's some sort of initial downloader that would download some other malware, and then the attack chain will follow. In other cases, it might be other PowerShell or other scripting languages that would run. When they try to capture the passwords not through phishing, the most common way is brute force. I explained at the beginning, it's simply stands for the repeating attempts to guess the password over and over again, thousands and millions of times until they find the right match. In other cases, 7%, they use what's called US credential dumping, which means that they would try to dump the hashes of the passwords in a corporate environment from, say, the Windows password store, and then try to extract the actual password from that for those passwords. When they move laterally, in most cases, they use remote services protocols such as RDP, SMB, etc. Those protocols often enabled in corporate networks, so they work. In other cases, they might use alternate authentication, for example, pass the hash attack, where they would use stolen Kerberos tickets to get access to different resources on the network without authorization. When they try to create persistence, as you can see, it's kind of a split between manipulating existing accounts and infecting them with malicious code or running malicious code by using those existing accounts, Or in other cases, they might, in the other half of the cases maybe, they might create new accounts and use them to run malware on a regular basis. Persistence basically means installing malware in a way that even if that computer system is restarted, the malware will be reloaded and run. That provides them long-term control of that system. So let's talk a little bit about the key takeaways for retailers as reflected from everything we discussed so far. First of all, there are unique vulnerabilities that e-commerce might have, excuse me, and have to be taken very carefully. Web applications that are used for online shopping and websites, data servers behind those web applications have to be very carefully secured. The cybercriminals nowadays are very capable, and if the code of those applications is not very carefully tested and reviewed, they might figure out ways to run malicious code on those systems, and from there, their path to the data sometimes becomes possible. Seasonal fluctuations, even if a retailer has to hire many people or add more security systems, or computer systems to handle the peak of the season, it has to be done very carefully. So they have to make sure that all those systems or additional employees have the right training or are well protected from computer security perspective. Third-party dependency, probably the most difficult one, simply because it's sometimes outside of our control for the most part, but any vendor we work with and we use their technology in some sort of B2B or applications that they are integrated with the retailer applications or systems, or other vendors that provide staff members or employees that have access to the retailer systems or locations, have to be very carefully reviewed and checked that they follow careful computer security guidelines, or monitoring their employees and making sure that they're not involved knowingly or unknowingly in some cybercrime. As I said, it's perhaps the most difficult one, but it's a necessity because third-party breaches do happen. Physical security risks, different locations, point-of-sale systems, warehouses, computer networks, anything that either consumers, buyers, or other people might get access to must be secure and reviewed carefully. Diverse payment system, we talked about the fact that retailers nowadays have to support different ways of paying, and all of them have to be carefully reviewed and make sure that the business cannot be breached or fraudulent transactions cannot be made through any of those payment methods. Ransomware threats, ransomware is always after data. It's always the first thing. They would try to get the initial access, move laterally, get to the data server, exfiltrate as much data as they can and use it for extortion. And they would try also to lock those systems, delete backups. So it's minimizing risk against ransomware attacks has basically 3 levels. One, trying to make sure that the initial access would fail through, for example, employee education against phishing, by installing patches regularly and quickly, by having the proper security software installed that would block any attempt to get in. Lateral movement, the networks have to be carefully protected, segmented. Data servers should not be available simply to normal employees. And last, the data shall be carefully secure. That means the data server, access to those servers shall be minimized only to the absolutely necessary people and applications. There shall be measures to identify attempts to exfiltrate large amounts of data, etc. And last, fraud. Fraud can impact, as I said, the consumers, so educate them how they might be targeted and to minimize the risk. At the end, if consumers are impacted by fraud, it can also impact the business of that retailer. in multiple ways. So we want to minimize that fraud. So with that, I think, Doug, we are done with this part, but I think we have some time for questions.
Wonderful, and it's a good thing because we do have a few built up here, so let's jump in. First question, how do cyber criminals most commonly gain the initial access to a retailer system?
Okay, so that's a good question, but not a simple one, because there are many different ways how they might get access. So I'll name a few of them. Okay, I talked about phishing, for example, phishing that targets the employees. If the employees are tempted to provide their passwords through some social engineering story, or to run the malicious attachment, or open a malicious link, eventually either the cybercriminal might get their credentials and log in, or use the malware execution to download more malware, get the foothold to that network, and from there starts moving laterally. Other methods might be exploitation. For example, all those applications that are publicly accessible, and there will always be some systems or applications publicly accessible, such as the web servers, if they're not properly patched and not properly maintained, they might be exploited. It might be other systems that the retailer has that are publicly accessible, even perhaps unknowingly, and might be exploited and become the backdoor into the organization. It might be a physical breach. Sometimes someone walks in, manages to get access to some local computer, install a piece of malware, and from there get access. So there are multiple ways. Indeed, making sure that a complex network is properly protected and minimize the risk of breach is hard, but that's why it really requires to fully understand the digital presence of that business and analyze it fully, and making sure all the measures are in place. And again, we have consultants that can help consult and make sure that the business, the risk for a business is minimized.
All right, next question. Excuse me. When it comes to e-commerce being affected by cybercrime, is the risk higher on the consumer side or on the business side?
Okay, so cybercriminals would really target both of them. And even if we look at groups like MageCart, they target both the consumers and the businesses. But obviously, the way they do it would be very different. When they target the consumers, they would normally use password stealers, keyloggers, banking trojans, malware of that type to capture the credentials, the bank account details, etc., and from there log in or use the credit card information for fraudulent transactions, or simply sell them in underground forms. When they target the businesses, they would target the servers that I mentioned. Magento plugins used to be heavily targeted in the past by MageCart, but it's not limited to that. They would very carefully see what software and applications are used by those servers. And whenever they hear or manage to identify a new zero-day or some unknown vulnerability, they would try to exploit it so that they can access to those servers. The big benefit here is that if you you can steal only one set of credentials from a consumer for some retailer or some credit card information. But if you manage to breach the businesses, you can collect many thousands, hundreds of thousands of credit cards, which is a lot better. It's a lot harder. So the short answer to your question, they target both.
There we go. All right, next question. What are some of the reasons that ransomware groups target retailers as compared to, say, some other vertical sectors?
Ransomware groups really target anyone, almost any type of organization, but they will focus more on those businesses where they are more likely to make money. Now, there are a couple of factors here. One is how hard it is to compromise that organization. You know, compromising a bank, for example, is very hard. Not impossible, probably, but very hard because they put a lot of effort in securing their computer networks and computer applications. Other businesses, perhaps not that much. Second thing is, how much data does that business have? How much data does that business has that can be stolen and turned into and be monetized, right? Retailers, just by the type of the business, has massive amount of credit card information. And once they manage to breach those systems, they can steal them and monetize them in multiple different ways. It might be other ways, you know, like just user information can be also handy, and they can sell it on the underground forums. So retailers, simply by the fact they work with so many consumers, have great data that they can use. Now, they can steal other information, internal information from that retailer, diagrams, whatever they have that they can use for extortion. So that's why we see so many retailers being breached. But again, it's not just retailers being breached. We see ransomware attacks also against other industries.
All right. Well, with that answer, I think we are about out of time for this webinar, and we're going to have to wrap this up. I'd like to thank Ziv for his presentation and for all of his time, and especially thanking you for, again, taking the time out of your day to attend this event. So Ziv and I wish you all to have a great day, and we hope to see you again at another Trustwave webinar.
Thank you very much.